In our last video, we showed that the common perception that expected stats can reliably identify luck doesn't hold up. If you haven't seen that video, it'll add some helpful context for what we're doing today, so feel free to check it out first. I won't rehash all the details here, but the key takeaway was that gaps between expected and actual performance aren't always random, and they often reflect real, repeatable skills that expected metrics simply don't capture. A big part of that discussion was highlighting the pitfalls of using expected stats as predictive tools. But that doesn't mean that expected stats have no forward-looking value. They can help us flag players whose results are being driven by volatile components. Things like BABIP for hitters, BABIP against, home run to fly ball ratio, or left on base rate for pitchers. When a player's success, or struggles, leans heavily on those unstable variables, we might actually be able to make reasonable inferences about their future outcomes. In this video, we'll identify players whose 2025 seasons were boosted by metrics that tend to be unsustainable or highly variable. We'll start by pinpointing which stats show the most year-to-year volatility, then look at whether changes in those stats can explain changes in wOBA for hitters or ERA for pitchers. From there, we'll highlight the players with the biggest jumps or declines and dig into their individual context to evaluate whether they look poised for negative regression. As we demonstrated in our last video, batting average on balls in play, BABIP, was incredibly unstable year over year for both hitters and pitchers. Starting with hitters, among players with at least 400 plate appearances in both 2024 and 2025, there is no statistically significant relationship between their BABIP in the two seasons. In other words, a hitter's BABIP in one year tells us very little about what it'll be the following year. Despite that instability, changes in BABIP still has meaningful explanatory power. When we look at year-over-year changes in wOBA, the change in BABIP alone accounts for roughly 40% of the variation, as shown by the R-squared value. So even though BABIP is highly volatile, its swings materially influence a hitter's overall offensive line. Why does this matter? Because if BABIP is both unstable and strongly tied to changes in wOBA, then a major jump or drop in BABIP that drove a hitter's performance isn't something we should treat as a repeatable skill the way we might treat something like barrel percentage. That doesn't mean a high BABIP will necessarily come back down. Instability is not the same as must regress. Instead, it means that we should have lower confidence that hitters who relied heavily on BABIP-driven production will sustain that performance going into 2026. This list shows the 10 players who saw the largest year-over-year rises in BABIP in 2025. As we can see, all 10 players also experienced year-over-year rises in their wOBA. The rise in BABIP, though, still doesn't tell us how their 2025 season compared to the league environment or their career. Essentially, was the big year-over-year change in BABIP more likely due to a 2025 outlier, a 2024 outlier, or a genuine skill change? When we compare each player's 2025 BABIP to the 2025 league average and to their career average BABIP, all 10 exceeded both benchmarks. One exception, or at least one caveat, is Corbin Carroll. Unlike the other players, Carroll's presence on this list seems to be driven more by an unusually low BABIP in 2024 rather than an unusually high one in 2025. His 2025 BABIP overperformance relative to both the league and his career norm is far smaller than any of the others. But can these BABIP jumps actually be explained by real skill changes? For these 10 hitters, the answer is partially, but not entirely. 9 of the 10 saw a year-over-year increase in barrel rate, and 8 saw an increase in hard hit percentage, both signs of improved contact quality. Yet only J.P. Crawford and Corbin Carroll posted an expected batting average higher than their actual batting average. Remember that expected batting average evaluates each batted ball using its exit velocity and launch angle and compares it to the historical outcomes of similarly batted ball types. So if most of these hitters hit the ball harder and barreled it more often, why did their expected batting average underperform their actual batting average? This suggests something besides hard hit percentage or barrel rate was inflating their BABIP. The clearest example is Harrison Bader. His 2025 batted ball profile tells a very different story beneath the surface. His pop-up rate increased, while his line drive and fly ball rates declined, generally not a recipe for sustaining a high BABIP. On top of that, his strikeout rate jumped 5 percentage points, landing him in the 12th percentile league-wide. So although his barrel and hard hit gains look encouraging, several other underlying metrics help explain why his actual batting average outpaced his expected one by so much. I think nearly everyone on this list, Carroll excluded, carries legitimate flags for having overperformed in 2025, but Bader stands out as the most likely case of meaningful overperformance. That doesn't guarantee regression in 2026, of course, but it does raise interesting questions about how teams will view him in free agency, with organizations clearly aware of some of his less flattering underlying metrics. Let's now move over to pitchers. There are 3 stats I want to focus on. Each shows significant year-over-year volatility, yet year-to-year changes in these variables are statistically significant predictors of changes in ERA. We'll look at each one individually, then bring them together to identify pitchers who may have meaningfully overperformed in 2025. First is BABIP against. Unlike hitters' BABIP, pitchers' BABIP allowed does show some stability. As we highlighted in the last video with the Andrew Abbott example, certain pitchers possess repeatable soft contact skills. But even with that partial stability, BABIP against is still far less reliable year to year than something like strikeout rate, walk rate, or ground ball rate. Despite this instability, changes in BABIP allowed are statistically significant drivers of changes in ERA. Just like with hitters, swings in a relatively volatile stat can still have a large impact on a pitcher's surface level results. The second stat is home run to fly ball ratio. Recall that this stat is deemed so variable that in the xFIP calculation, the league average home run to fly ball ratio replaces a pitcher's actual home runs. Like BABIP, home run to fly ball ratio has little year-over-year stability, but the changes in the home run to fly ball ratio are statistically significant variables on changes on ERA. Finally, we will look at left on base percentage, which measures the percentage of base runners that a pitcher strands on base over the course of a season. Again, left on base percentage shows strong variation year over year, but changes in left on base percentage explain 52% of the variation in ERA, as demonstrated by the R-squared value. When we graph the year-over-year changes in all 3 of these metrics, 2 pitchers jump off the page for having dramatic improvements across the board, Trevor Rogers and Nathan Eovaldi, but their stories and the implications for 2026 look very different. Let's start with Rogers. There's no question that Rogers made real improvement in 2025. He added a sweeper that posted a 38% whiff rate and held hitters to a .065 batting average against it. Both his strikeout rate and walk rate improved substantially relative to 2024. These are all real, stable skill indicators. But alongside those legitimate gains, Rogers also benefited from massive improvements in all 3 of the volatile metrics we just discussed. His BABIP against dropped 96 points year-on-year to 226, and sat a full 139 points below his career average. This occurred despite allowing a hard hit rate above 48%, which ranked in the 3rd percentile among MLB pitchers. His home run to fly ball ratio fell by 4.9 percentage points to 5.5%, his second lowest mark ever, and nearly 4 points below his career norm. Finally, his left on base percentage jumped 14.4 percentage points to 84.2, the 4th highest figure in all of baseball and almost 12 points above his career average. So while Rogers did show meaningful skill improvement, His breakout 2025 season was also supported by career or near-career best marks in 3 of the most volatile yet ERA-critical pitching metrics. That combination presents very real downside risk heading into 2026. Eovaldi also saw a notable year-over-year improvement in those same volatile stats, but unlike Rogers, his underlying profile suggests that much of the improvements may be real and repeatable. His strikeout rate rose from 23.9% in 2024 to 26% in 2025, while his walk rate fell from 6% in 2024 to 4.2%, placing him in the 98th percentile for MLB pitchers. Additionally, Eovaldi lowered his hard hit rate from 42.6% in 2024 to 38.5% in 2025. In short, Eovaldi made significant and more replicable improvements in 2025 that will likely maintain his position as a very good pitcher in 2026. Still, Eovaldi benefited from very volatile metrics. His BABIP against dropped by 28 points to 243, which was 56 points lower than his career average. But unlike Rogers, this drop occurred alongside a meaningful reduction in hard contact, suggesting more sustainable improvement. His home run to fly ball ratio dropped 5.4 percentage points year over year to 9.6%, but was just 1.8 percentage points below his career average. Finally, looking at left on base percentage, Eovaldi improved by 12 percentage points year over year to 86.5%, 13.4 percentage points above his career average and the best mark in the league. Left on base percentage is volatile, but it correlates strongly with strikeout minus walk rate. Eovaldi finished top 10 in strikeout minus walk rate in 2025, meaning that his elevated left on base percentage is likely more skill driven than luck driven. What emerges is a clear contrast between the two players. Rogers' improvement was supported heavily by 3 extremely volatile stats that he likely cannot sustain, and his contact profile, 3rd percentile hard hit rate, conflicts with his BABIP improvement. Eovaldi's improvement also included volatile stat jumps, but his underlying skill metrics, an elite strikeout minus walk rate, and reduced hard contact, support the idea that much of his improvement is real. Both pitchers posted sub 1.85 ERAs in 2025, so regression in 2026 is almost inevitable. But the level of confidence we have in their performance going forward is completely different. For Rogers, there is significant downside risk, with his success propped up by unsustainable metrics. For Eovaldi, underlying skills justify much of the improvement, and he appears far more likely to remain a top-tier starter in 2026. What these examples really show is that volatile stats on their own don't tell us whether someone actually overperformed, but they do point us in the right direction. A big jump in BABIP for hitters, or improvements in BABIP against, home run to fly ball rate, or left on base percentage for a pitcher should absolutely catch our attention. These stats move so much year to year that when they suddenly shift in a way that drives a breakout season, it raises a legitimate question of sustainability. But the key is context. Volatile metrics only become meaningful when we view them alongside a player's underlying skills and career norms. If the spike in a volatile stat lines up with improvements in things like hard hit rate, barrel rate, K-walk percentage, or reduced hard contact, then the performance might actually be supported. If it doesn't, as we saw in the cases like Trevor Rogers or several hitters that we looked at, then there's a far stronger case that a player's results were being held up by noise rather than a repeatable skill. These volatile stats don't predict regression, they simply highlight where we should look more closely. It's only once we bring in the underlying skill metrics and the player's own history that we can start to distinguish real growth from likely overperformance. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe. It would really help the channel continue to grow. Thank you, and see you again next video.